There are times that I sit down to record these videos and I know exactly what I want to talk about. There's been some spark of inspiration or even anger that has really inspired me to have a conversation, something that I think might be helpful or important for us to be able to talk about. And then there are days when that isn't necessarily the case. And so I try to seek out inspiration. And sometimes it's an important reminder for me, and I think probably for you too. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. If you are new here, and I do have a lot of new people, I really appreciate you being here, and I do hope that you find this channel helpful. I don't even know how many videos I have at this point, but I know that I've been doing them for over 10 years. I think about 12 at this point. So I do hope that you find something beneficial. So I really do typically feel like I have talked about everything at least once. There's a lot of things that I talk about or have talked about many times. And I have wondered at times, like, should I not talk about this? I already have so many videos out there where I'm talking about this. Is it redundant? Are people going to get annoyed? And I'm reminded that so often on videos in which I'm talking about something for whether it's the second time or the fifth time, that there are people who are still commenting and gaining something from that. And as someone who creates content and has been doing it for a long time, that really can be a helpful reminder. And this has been around for a little while, but I don't typically use it, at least not very often. But within YouTube, they have like an inspiration thing to help you kind of feel inspired to create certain types of content. And there's been a few times that I've looked at it and it's been helpful. And then some other times when I've looked at it and I think, are they just like scanning my channel and giving me ideas of things I've already talked about? Because they're literally things that I've already talked about, sometimes more than once. And recently, when I was trying to prepare something for this video, I decided to use it again. And in that, I'm just pulling it up real quick, but when I saw that and I looked at, like, there's like 4 or 5 different options, they're all things that I have talked about in one way or probably 10 ways before. But I decided to go into it a little bit deeper because it gives you some different things. And one of the things it had was an outline, and I looked at the outline, and literally as I was going through it, I was like, I've talked about these things before. And I found myself feeling kind of frustrated because, like, why are you suggesting these things to me when I've done not just one video, but on this topic, I've done so many videos. And I felt honestly kind of frustrated by it because I felt like it wasn't helpful at all. And then I tried to think of something else that I could do a video on, and still feeling really kind of stuck. So I took a deep breath, kind of got up and did a couple of things, and then came back to it and looked through it again and thought, these things are important. They matter and they affect people, sometimes deeply for a lifetime. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want people to be affected by it for a lifetime. And the sooner they're no longer affected by it, the better. And I do know, I deeply do understand this and know this to be true, that when it comes to any sort of significant self-development, growth, change, and absolutely with healing, we need to go over things many times. Many times. And sometimes even well into the healing, we need to go through them again because they are that deeply ingrained and that impactful. And here we talk about all kinds of things that are difficult to talk about, things that a lot of people in our world and in our our own individual world, like the people around us, really don't want to talk about. And when we hold on to those things, it becomes more impactful. And so I wanted to share with you just one of the things that was suggested for me today, because I'd like your feedback. And I think also just a reminder that if you have struggled with this, if you feel like you continue to struggle with it, know first that you're not alone. Know that it not only kind of makes sense, but working through this stuff over and over again at different points through your journey is the journey. That is an innate part of the healing process, that we have to revisit different things at different stages in our journey, because what we're able to take in is going to be different along that road. We internalize it more deeply. We understand it better because we have more context for it. So, I'll let you know what the feedback is afterward, because I'd kind of like you to hear this first. So as you're listening to this, just if you've heard it all before, acknowledge that, and just try to keep listening if you can, because your feedback will be important to me. So no matter where you are in this journey, whether this really resonates for you at all, whether you feel like you've heard it all before or not, your feedback, wherever you land in that, will be important for me to understand what kinds of things are helpful to talk about. Because certainly some days I feel like I've said it all too many times. And when I say too many times, I mean for you, not for me. Too many times for you that you're going to get frustrated and annoyed that I keep saying the same things over and over again, and then not want to watch. So the topic, and this was one that my audience, I don't remember how it words it, but my audience is very interested in. It's a very popular topic. So, shame and guilt. Shame and guilt after trauma. Finding self-compassion. And if I used AI to identify what my channel is about, like those three things, right? Shame, guilt, and self-compassion would probably all be within the top 5, if not literally the top 3 things. So that was the main topic. Shame and guilt after trauma, finding self-compassion. So it gave me an outline, and I want to just kind of read through these things to you, and for you to recognize a couple of different things. One is, does it resonate? Do you feel like you have any sort of connection to that? Is it something that you're interested in? Is it something that you have been impacted by? However you might think about that. And then also, whatever that answer is, do you remember seeing a video in which I've talked about any of these things? Like, so that thing, whether you resonated with it or not, have you seen a video in which I have spoken about that before? Again, this is helpful information for me to get a sense of these recommendations and how helpful it actually is, because I don't want to create something that you don't find helpful. And if it does still feel like it resonates and it's something that you'd like more of, even if I've done a video on it and you've seen it, that is really helpful information for me to have as well. So if there is something that comes to mind and you think, oh, I'd really like to understand it from this context or within this context, or a question comes to mind that you have about that thing, please also leave that in the comments, and then I can address those in upcoming videos, which would give me something that I can talk about as well. And I'm answering your question. So, the invisible wounds of shame and guilt. Unpacking why shame and guilt are common, yet rarely discussed. Post-trauma responses. Differentiating between healthy guilt regret over actions, and toxic shame, feeling inherently flawed. And lastly, highlighting the isolating nature of these emotions and the internal narratives they create. So that's the invisible wounds of shame and guilt. And pause if you need to take a note or to write or whatever you want to do. If any of those are things that you can relate to, things that you'd like to see more of, any particular questions that you have, and have you seen, do you recall seeing a video in which I've talked about any of that? Not necessarily, you don't have to identify the video, but just do you remember me talking about it? The next one, deconstructing the why, trauma's distortion. Exploring how trauma can hijack our sense of self-blame even when we're victims. Now, I wouldn't have said it that way, but I think you probably can make the connection there. Examining societal messages and cultural norms that inadvertently perpetuate shame around vulnerability. And lastly, understanding that these feelings are a symptom of the trauma, not a reflection of your worth. Again, same thing. So if you want to pause, take a moment. Tiny steps towards self-compassion. Introduce the concept of self-compassion as a gentle internal embrace, not self-pity. Practical exercises. Shared humanity and mindful self-kindness. So kind of like reminding yourself of other people that struggle with the same kinds of things and how you feel about them, how you would think about them. How to use a compassionate voice internally when shame or guilt arises. Reframing harsh self-talk. So again, and I know for some of you, I think quite a few of you, knowing whether I've talked about it here on YouTube, whether I've talked about it in a group, or whether it is in Deeply Rooted, might be a little bit challenging. So if you're not quite sure where you've heard me talk about it, that's okay, but just kind of recognizing whether or not you have. And to be honest, all of these things, and certainly much more, these things related to the self-compassion aspect, these are all things that I talk about and go through and give exercises for, probably in a few different ways in Deeply Rooted, the workbook guided journal that I created to help cultivate self-compassion for healing shame. The next part, reclaiming your narrative from blame to acceptance. The power of externalizing shame and guilt. It's something you feel, not something you are. Gentle journaling prompts, exploring the story you tell yourself versus the objective reality of the trauma. And embracing imperfection and acknowledging your resilience in the face of immense challenge. So again, maybe pause if you need to. And I wanted to share this with you because all of these things are pieces of both the shame that we carry and guilt. And anytime that you have shame, guilt almost automatically becomes shame. Because when you have shame, we may be able to have a conscious thought about it, but even like the example that I gave about the difference between guilt and shame, and guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am something bad. But when we have any shame whatsoever, and we feel guilty about something, so I did a bad thing, it immediately turns to shame, because the shame is a felt experience. It's an emotional experience. There can be thoughts that go along with it, but it's a really intense emotional reaction. And so when we think that we've done something bad, it's because we believe we are bad. Not that we made a mistake. It's that we believe that we are inherently bad, and therefore I did a bad thing. So, um, so even with guilt, if we're trying to separate that out, guilt, once you have shame, guilt and shame are kind of immediately entwined. So, even if you've seen me talk about a lot of different things related to shame and healing and releasing, shedding, as I've talked about it recently, shame, are there any things that stood out to you that I read that you'd like me to talk more about, that you'd like to understand a little bit better? Certainly, any specific questions that you have around that. Because it truly is, I really do feel this way. Answering questions, answering the same questions over and over again, I can honestly say that I have never felt frustrated by that. And I'm not necessarily a particularly patient person around a lot of things in my life. But when it comes to the reality of healing, I feel like I'm pretty patient because I understand the reality of what it means to heal. I understand what it takes to heal. And we can only take things in to a certain degree at certain times. We can hear something early on in the journey and it may resonate and we may think, oh yes, that makes sense. And we may take it in to an extent. And in that moment, we might feel like we are completely embodying that. But the moment self-doubt creeps in, the moment shame kicks in, the moment we're feeling vulnerable, the conviction we had about that sense of really understanding, it's kind of disappearing. We may even completely forget it or find reasons that it doesn't apply to us, because that is how this process works. And so our ability to take it in, our ability to internalize it, to really kind of be able to wrap our understanding around it in all the ways that we need to be able to understand it, is incredibly limited. And that's true for anybody, no matter who you are. It has nothing to do with your ability or intelligence or anything like that. That is just the reality of how our mind works, particularly when we have built incredible survival mechanisms and defense mechanisms. You might hear that same thing a few months later, or even a year later, especially a year later. And let's say that you're like in a little bit of a better place. You're feeling more confident about being on the journey. You are recognizing that maybe it's possible that some of those things you believed about yourself are not actually true. Maybe certainly probably don't believe it fully yet, but you're on the way. If you hear that same exact thing a year later, maybe from the same person, maybe from a different person, maybe from a 10th person, but you're in a place at that particular time on that day where you hear it and it lands a little bit differently. Maybe you're able to take it in a little bit more deeply. Maybe you're able to apply it to a different type of context or nuance. And so in that time, when you're hearing the exact same thing, maybe even from the exact same person, you're able to internalize it, to believe it a little bit more, a little bit differently. And then you hear it again a few months later or a year later, and the same thing happens. But until you've been able to hear it from that particular place, you're only able to take it in to a certain degree. You're only able to understand it from where you are at that particular time. Right? Like if you think about learning complicated math related things, if you haven't learned certain things about math and how math works, and somebody throws something out there to you, even if you're understanding what they're saying, if you don't have the building blocks to help you understand what it actually means and how to use it, it's not really going to do you any good, right? But once you've had more opportunity to learn and understand how it all fits together, to experience different things that help you understand that, once you then are at that place and you hear it again or you see it again, your understanding of it is completely different. And that is true for pretty much everything that we learn in life. So, a couple things from this video. One, your feedback is helpful, and I'd really like to know if there are things that you would like me to talk about again, or maybe differently, or maybe something you feel like I haven't necessarily addressed or you haven't heard me address and you think would be helpful. So that is definitely a big part of this. And I also want to remind you that people can feel incredibly frustrated when they know something. So they know it, they've heard it, they've read it, they've learned it, they understand it on a conscious, rational level, on a cognitive level, but they can't yet apply it, or they have difficulty being able to apply it in a moment. That has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your ability. It has nothing to do with your determination. And it certainly has nothing to do with you being deserving of being able to heal. That is just the reality of how we learn, how we incorporate, how we internalize, how we truly understand something. It is inherent in this process. So if you've beaten yourself up about knowing it but not being able to do it, or just not getting it, or however you might be talking to yourself, this is a good opportunity to practice some of that self-compassion. Self-compassion incorporates so many different things about how we treat ourselves. And you show compassion to others, and you are equally deserving of that compassion as well. And you have the power. Now, it takes practice. It's not easy. You have to remind yourself, and it can even feel uncomfortable. But you have the capacity to be able to give yourself the compassion that you deserve, that will help you release the shame, the guilt, the self-blame, all of those things, the doubt, so that you can experience the healing that you deserve. So, share in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here, and I will look forward to seeing you soon.